Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this exploration of some of the art, science, and mysticism of Central Europe. Recently, the English Grand Lodge for the Americas organized a journey through Hungary, Austria, combine those two, the Czech Republic, and Poland. And we explored the beauty and mystique of Budapest, Vienna, Prague, Krakow, and Warsaw. From prehistoric times, 36,000 years ago, to ancient Roman times, to the transformative periods of the Alchemists, the Renaissance, and the Enlightenment. During our journey, there was a focus on the transformative power of alchemy, and we visited several historic alchemy labs and learned a lot about the alchemist and practiced some alchemical meditations. I'm going to share some slides with you now. Hold on for just a minute. Okay, so here you can see a map of Europe, including the part that we visited. We began our journey in Hungary and Budapest, and then we went over to Austria, spent some time in Vienna, up to Prague in the Czech Republic, then over to Krakow and Warsaw in Poland. We began our journey in Budapest, and the history of Budapest began with an early Celtic settlement, which was transformed into the Roman town called Aquincum in the 1st century of our era. So it's about 2,000 years old, that Roman town was, and there was an older tribe in that area before then. Today, Budapest is the capital of Hungary, and the estimated population is about 1.75 million people. Budapest is known for its beautiful architecture, blending various styles, including Gothic, Renaissance, and Art Nouveau. The central area of Budapest along the Danube River is classified as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And this includes the Hungarian Parliament building, as well as Buda Castle, which we see here. And it is a stunningly beautiful city. Budapest is also known for its thermal baths. So I mentioned that there was an old Roman town called Aquincum, and that was our first visit during our journey. And this is a map of the Roman Empire in the 2nd century of our era. So all of the colored areas there, the Romans had conquered that. The Roman Empire was massive. And the area shows Aquincum there, and you can see it's a border town. It's on the edge of where the Roman Empire had expanded to. We visited the remains of Mithraic temple there, and we also saw the remains of other buildings in this area that show what this town would have looked like when there were 30 to 50,000 people living there 2,000 years ago. And this here we have the remains of the Mithraeum. And this tradition flourished from the 1st to the 4th centuries of our era. Everywhere where there were Roman settlements, especially Roman soldiers, there were Mithraic temples. These mysteries involved a series of initiations, rituals, and symbolic practices that emphasized a person's salvation and prescribed moral conduct and shared an understanding of cosmic order. All of the Mithraeums that have been found they are set up in exactly the same way, and they would have been covered or in a cave. And there was always a figure who is called Mithras, and he also represents Perseus, who is associated with the constellation Perseus, and it always shows him slaying a bull. And this symbolizes the shift from the age of Taurus, the age of the bull, to the Age of Aries. And these ancient people, amazingly, were aware of the precession of the equinoxes, which caused changes over thousands of years in the constellations that they could see when they looked up. So they understood that Earth wobbled and that we looked up and we would see different constellations over long periods of time. And the Mithraic mysteries, the people involved, they worship whatever deity was powerful enough to move the heavens, to move the constellations that they saw above them. The Mithraic mysteries had 7 initiatory degrees. They had 2 torchbearer figures who were part of the symbolism in the temples. So here in a Kuntshammer, the Stoic Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote some of his meditations. And we've spoken about this Stoic philosopher and Roman emperor before. Marcus Aurelius kept a personal diary. And after his transition, this was published in what is called Meditations, but he actually called it To Himself. This was his personal diary. And here are a few excerpts from what he wrote. And again, it's believed that he wrote some of these meditations while he was stationed in a Kuntshammer here, just outside of Budapest. Honor and revere the deities. Treat human beings as they deserve. Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. Remember, nothing belongs to you but your flesh and blood, and nothing else is under your control. Here's something else from Meditations. Keep in mind how fast things pass by and are gone, those that are now and those to come. Existence flows past us like a river. The what is in constant flux. The why has 1,000 variations. Nothing is stable, not even what's right here. The last one that I'll share to you, again written in Marcus Aurelius's personal diary to himself, the things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts. When we were in Budapest, we also visited the former home, and it's now a museum, of Maria Cepes, who is the author of The Red Lion, one of the most famous alchemical books. The Red Lion is an alchemical symbol representing a crucial stage in the pursuit of the philosopher's stone in alchemy. And this is linked to the idea of achieving spiritual enlightenment and immortality. And this is a tough book to read, and it's still worth reading. It's a very challenging book. The novel explores themes of greed, sin, redemption, and the consequences of seeking immortality without proper spiritual preparation. Then we had the great pleasure of visiting the Hungarian Grand Lodge in this beautiful lakeside village called Tata, which is about 40 miles northwest of Budapest. And we met with fellow Rosicrucians there and had an experience in the temple led by the Grand Master of the Hungarian Grand Lodge, Ákos Ekes. And I always, the S's are pronounced differently than we pronounce them in English. So it looks like Ákos, but it's Ákos Ekes. So this beautiful town has a very long history, back to prehistoric and Roman times. And then in the year 1727, Count József Esterházy bought the town, bought Tata and the surrounding villages. And the Esterházy castle is near the building that became the home to the Hungarian Grand Lodge with its beautiful temple. And here is that castle that is, you can see it from the Hungarian Grand Lodge. It's just across a walkway there. And we just had such a beautiful experience with our fellow Rosicrucians there. It was fantastic. Definitely a highlight of our tour. Before we leave Hungary, I feel like you can't know Hungary without being aware of Franz Liszt, Ferenc Liszt, and he is so beloved by the Hungarian people. This is an image of Franz Liszt. He was a Hungarian composer, virtuoso, pianist, and conductor. He was widely regarded as one of the most influential musicians of the 19th century. He lived from 1811 to 1886, and he is often referred to as the first rock star. During his time, he was so popular that Heinrich Heine coined the term Listomania more than a century before Beatlemania. And Franz Liszt is still extremely popular today. He performed over 1,000 concerts in a 10-year period between 1838 and 1848. He had great flair. He was born in a German-speaking market town in Austria, which bordered on Hungarian territory. But it had a large population of Magyar, ethnic Hungarian people, people of Hungarian descent. And although his first language was German, he remained deeply proud of his Hungarian roots, and this greatly inspired his work throughout his lifetime. He was a child prodigy. He was commissioned to write a piece for the coronation Franz Joseph, Emperor Franz Joseph, and Elizabeth of Bavaria, the famous Empress Sissi, and he traveled to Budapest to conduct it. Liszt's father was a musician who worked for the Esterházy family, whom I had just mentioned. Then we traveled to Vienna. This is the Vienna Opera House, and Vienna was a hub of musical innovation and creativity from the late 1700s through the 1800s, earning its nickname, the City of Music. And there were a number of factors that created this condition. First of all, it was the cultural capital of the Habsburg Empire. So the monarchy was based there, and it was a major political, cultural, and economic center in Europe. And the court and the aristocracy were avid patrons of the arts, commissioning works and supporting musicians. The Habsburg rulers, such as Emperor Joseph II, were enthusiastic supporters of music and created an environment where composers could thrive. There was a wealthy audience, and Vienna had a prosperous middle class and aristocracy. They enjoyed attending operas and concerts and salons. There was so much innovation there. It was a melting pot of styles and traditions. And Vienna attracted musicians and composers from all over Europe, and they collaborated in Vienna. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's life in Vienna was a period of great success and productivity. Mozart lived from 1756 to 1791. He was a prolific and influential Austrian composer whose works remain cornerstones of classical music. Mozart was born in Salzburg to a musical family, and he was a child prodigy, composing music and performing across Europe at a very young age. He excelled in every musical genre of his time, including symphonies, operas, chamber music, and concertos. And everyone's familiar with at least one piece of music by Mozart, The Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, The Magic Flute, and his Requiem. So I'm going to introduce a few other composers who were important in Vienna, but we are going to explore them in detail in a future teleconference that will be dedicated just to Vienna as the city of music. So next we see Franz Joseph Haydn, who lived from 1732 to 1809. He is often called the father of the symphony and father of the string quartet, and he was a pivotal Austrian composer in the classical era. And Haydn spent much of his career as a court musician for the wealthy Esterházy family at their Esterházy castle, and we saw in Tata next to the Hungarian Grand Lodge. Haydn was a friend and mentor to Mozart and was Beethoven's tutor. Next we see Ludwig van Beethoven, who was born in Germany in 1770, and he died in Vienna in 1827. He moved to Vienna twice. The first time he moved there, he was only 17 years old, and he was meant to study under Mozart's tutelage. But Beethoven's mother was near death, so he left. He went back to Germany. And then when he came the next time, he studied under Joseph Haydn, and he stayed in Vienna until 1792. Then we have Franz Schubert, who was born and died in Vienna, and he composed many beautiful pieces of music, including Ave Maria that many people are familiar with. This is Johann Strauss II. He lived from 1825 to 1899, and he is often called the Waltz King. And he wrote the most famous waltz of all time, the Blue Danube Waltz. You know that song. Da 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 da, bum 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 bum. So he was extremely well liked. He was very popular. And in addition to writing this classic Blue Danube waltz, he wrote many other pieces, including what we commonly refer to as the can-can music. So he had a great variety of talent. This is Johannes Brahms, who lived from 1833 to 1897, and he moved to Vienna as an adult and remained there for the rest of his life. In addition to composing Brahms' Lullaby, which everyone knows, he also wrote 4 symphonies, Hungarian dances. He was a very prolific composer. And this is an image of Gustav Mahler, who lived from 1860 to 1911. He was an Austrian composer and conductor whose works bridged the late Romantic and early modern eras. So again, we're going to explore the music of the city of music, Vienna, in a future teleconference. So in Vienna, we also visited this amazing place, which is the Museum of Art History, Kunsthistorisches Museum, with its exceptional galleries of ancient Egyptian artifacts, really an exceptional collection, and the largest collection of objects from the mystical Emperor Rudolf II's Kunsthammer. It was his personal museum with its rare gems, mathematical instruments, and curiosities. So the term Kunsthammer translates to a chamber of art or cabinet of arts and marvels. And these collections were created by wealthy and powerful people in Europe who wanted to impress others that they had this great taste and collecting skill and that they were knowledgeable about art and nature. Rudolf II was one of the most important patrons of the arts of the powerful Habsburg dynasty. And he lived in the late 1500s and early 1600s. Now, we're going to talk more about him when we get to Prague. The Habsburg dynasty was a royal German family that ruled over a vast empire in Europe from 1282 until 1918. So they ruled massive amounts of Europe for 650 years. This included at various times Austria, Hungary, and Bohemia. Bohemia is where Prague is, Spain, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Burgundy, and the Holy Roman Empire. And the Emperor Rudolf II, whose portrait is on the left, his portrait's also on the right, he was born in Vienna, where for many years, the court of the Habsburg family was in Vienna. Rudolf II was born there in 1552. He later moved the court to Prague and gathered around him what's called the magic circle of Rudolf II. And we'll talk more about that later. So his collection was mainly in Prague, but there was a smaller collection of his cabinet of arts in Vienna. And then later, when after his collection was plundered during the 30 Years' War, the objects that had been kept in Vienna were still there. And those can be seen in the Kunsthistorisches Museum today. So this painting on the right is by Giuseppe Arcimboldo. And in Roman mythology, Vertumnus is the god of changing seasons, gardens, fruit trees, and plant growths. This is a painting of Rudolf II as that deity. And the artist communicated so much with this. For example, the Roman deity kept things fruitful throughout the year. And so it's showing that Rudolf II had an underlying permanence. The portrait shows the balance and harmony with nature, art, and science, all of which Rudolf II believed he represented during his reign. And during the Renaissance, collections of foreign goods were the status symbols for the rich. So you see on his ears, Rudolf II has corn, and this was a crop originating from the New World. So by including foreign crops, it communicates that Rudolf II had access to these extremely rare items, showing his power and wealth. Rudolf promoted the scholarly arts and sciences. He brought to his court historians, antiquarians, mathematicians, and astronomers, experts in the occult, theologists, physicians, and alchemists. So he was the patron of these people, making it possible for them to continue their practices and studies. And they worked in Prague at his behest. Many of them were the pioneers of modern science, such as Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler. We'll talk about them a little bit later. This is an item from Rudolf II's personal collection that you can see in the Museum of Art History in Vienna. This is an automaton in the form of a galleon from 1585 made in silver, and it actually moved. This is a celestial globe with clockwork made for Rudolf II in 1579. Directly across from that amazing building, well, I showed you the front of this Museum of Art History, is a twin building. And this is the Museum of Natural History. It's one of the finest in the world. And this has a rare collection of dinosaur fossils, an exceptional exhibit of meteors and two figurines that are extraordinarily important. The first is the Venus of Willendorf. It's a figurine from between 25,000 and 29,000 years ago. This was discovered in 1908. It's one little figurine. This just shows all four sides. It was discovered in 1908 and is one of the earliest images of the body made by humankind. It's about 4.5 inches long and was carved probably 29,000 years ago. The people living in this area were living during the Ice Age, where the climate was inhospitable and excess body fat was not common and therefore appreciated. The statue, with its fleshy rear and ample stomach, would have been unattainable body standards for people in that day. And this little figure was found on the banks of the Danube River in Austria. Next, we have an even older figurine, the Galgenberg figurine, from between 30,000 and 36,000 years ago. It was also found in Austria in 1988, and it's a hand-carved serpentine rock in a dancing pose, and it's 2.8 inches high. The Belvedere Palace in Vienna houses the largest collection and most important collection of paintings by the Austrian symbolist painter Gustav Klimt, including the Kiss, this very famous painting. Klimt, who lived from 1862 to 1918, was an Austrian painter and a leading figure of the Vienna Succession, which was an art movement known for its richly decorative and symbolist works that celebrated beauty, sensuality, and emotional depth. Klimt was born in Vienna, and he trained at the Vienna School of Arts and Crafts and began his career creating murals and architectural designs. Then he later embraced his very distinctive style. This is the portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer, also by Klimt. And if you've seen the film Woman in Gold, it's about this portrait. This was commissioned by Adele Bloch-Bauer's husband, and it shows Adele, a very wealthy Viennese patron of the arts. She's richly adorned, and it combines Art Nouveau and Byzantine influences. The portrait became iconic for its elegance and Klimt's innovative style. And then it gained further fame as a symbol of cultural restitution after being reclaimed by Adele's heirs following its seizure by the Nazis during World War II, and her family was able to reclaim this portrait of her. Known as the Woman in Gold, it represents both artistic brilliance and the complex history of art and ownership. Next, we traveled through the Instal Alps to Admont Abbey. And this beautiful photograph was taken in the little town of Admont by one of our tour participants, Diana. And it's so beautiful. Those swans were just waiting to greet us. It was just extraordinary. This Benedictine abbey was founded in 1074, and monks still live here today. It's a massive abbey in the Alps here. And its amazing library is one of the great works of art from the late Baroque period, and it is the largest monastic library in the world with over 200,000 volumes. There are over 200,000 books in this beautiful library. Then we experience South National Park with its inspiring views. We traveled to Chesny Krumlov in the Czech Republic. And this is a World Heritage Site, and it's a great example of a small European medieval town whose architecture has remained intact through the centuries. Here's what a street looks like there. Excuse me. The Czech Republic is well known for being the home of the Czech philosopher, theologian, and educator John Amos Comenius, who lived from 1592 to 1670. And he's often regarded as the father of modern education. He was born in Moravia and was deeply influenced by the educational reforms of the Protestant Reformation. And he wanted to make learning accessible and systematic. And education was definitely not accessible before his time. His most significant contributions to education include his advocacy for universal schooling, the development of a more child-centered approach to learning, and his emphasis on the use of pictures and illustrations to aid understanding, especially in his renowned work called the Orbis Pictus, The Visible World, one of the first children's textbooks. Comenius also championed the idea of teaching in common language rather than Latin to make education more inclusive. His ideas on progressive education and learning through experience laid the groundwork for modern educational theory, influencing teaching practices worldwide. So then we arrived in Prague, and this is the famous Prague astronomical clock that was installed in 1410 and still functions. Prague Castle that we see here is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has its old royal palace where the defenestration of Prague took place, leading to the 30 Years' War and the postponement of the progress of Rosicrucianism. And the defenestration of Prague is very important in Rosicrucian history. So there was the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, and then there was a crackdown by the Roman Catholic Church, the Counter-Reformation, and then this went back and forth, and the Pope sent some representatives to Prague to force people to worship in ways that they didn't want to worship. And the Protestants in Prague grabbed those representatives and threw them out the window of Prague Castle. That's what defenestration means. They threw them out the window with probably the intention to kill them, but they landed on a pile of manure and they didn't die. And so they claimed that they were saved by God, and this led to the 30-Year War, where there were advances before this time, and it just was a devastating war that in parts of Europe killed 90% of the population. So there were parts, especially in Germany, but really all over in Bohemia, in all of these areas, it was not uncommon at all in the 30-Year War that half of the population was killed, either through battle or starvation or the pandemics that came from this horrible time. And so this all happened right after the Rosicrucians had called for the change in society, had called for the leaders of Europe to put an end to superstition and fighting and religious intolerance, and it was gaining some traction. And then with the 30 Years' War, it delayed the implementation of what the Rosicrucians were proposing. So Also in Prague is the Golden Lane with these tiny little dwellings. It's such a quaint area from the 1500s. So Prague Castle is this massive complex, and it includes these housing units that now are made into stores or museums, but these were people's homes. And the back, they're tiny. And on the back, if you were to look out the back windows, it would have a view of the city. And in this area, it includes 2 alchemy museums that we visited. Also in Prague is a street called Nerudova Street. And until the year 1770, there were no house or building numbers in Prague. You didn't have like 1342 Nagli Avenue or 123 Main Street. Before that, buildings were identified by signs. And you can see the sign here on the front of this building in the middle. It's a red lion. And Nerudova Street has the largest collection or the largest concentration of buildings with these signs. Many of them have alchemical significance because alchemists lived here. So you would say, oh, go to the house with the red lion. This is a close-up of the red lion that's on that building. And there were other houses. There was the White Swan. There was the House of the Golden Key, which represents the Philosopher's Stone. I mentioned Rudolf II earlier and the magic circle of Rudolf II. So after he moved his court from Vienna to Prague, he invited mathematicians and alchemists and artists, philosophers, and astronomers. These were the greatest and most free-thinking people of their time. He invited them to come to his court in Prague, and he supported them. He was their patron. He was dedicated. He was obsessed with wanting to understand the deepest secrets of nature and the riddle of existence. So he invited to his court an endless stream of genius. This is the Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe. And here is the German mathematician Johannes Kepler. Here's the English magus, John Dee. Here we have Francis Bacon and many others. Also in Prague is the Museum of Alchemists and Magicians of Old Prague. It's in the very house where Edward Kelly, who was John Dee's assistant and one of the most famous alchemists at the court of Rudolf II, lived. This was his home, and today it's an alchemy museum. And our last visit in Prague, and the highlight of the alchemical journey, was the Speculum Alchemy Museum, the incredible museum of alchemy with the original alchemical laboratory of the Emperor Rudolf II. So this intact underground alchemy lab was discovered in 2002 during the reconstruction of one of the oldest buildings in Prague. And today it's a museum left very much like it was found. So that was our journey from Budapest to Vienna to Prague. And then we had an extension that took us to Poland. And this is an image of Krakow and the Wawel Castle in Krakow, which in my personal experience is one of the most beautiful cities I've ever visited and one of my favorite cities in the world. It's just spectacular. Very quaint, beautiful. Wawel Castle supposedly had a dragon that protected it. And today there is a large metal sculpture of the Wawel dragon. This is a very large statue, and every few minutes it breathes out fire. There is also the Collegium Maius, and this is the oldest building in the university, the famous university that's in Krakow. And it's Jagiellonian University. Starts with a J, hard for me to pronounce. Jagiellonian University. It's one of the oldest universities in Europe and most historically prestigious universities in the world. It played an important role in science, education, and culture. Nicholas Copernicus and his brother were students at the university, and the future Pope John Paul II was a student and later a teacher at this university. And here's a beautiful image of it here. Copernicus, who lived from 1473 to 1543, was a Renaissance polymath and astronomer whose revolutionary model of the universe placed the sun rather than the earth at the center, fundamentally altering the course of scientific thought. Copernicus was born in Turin, Poland, and he was educated in mathematics, astronomy, law, and medicine at universities across Europe. His heliocentric theory, presented in his seminal work on the revolutions of the celestial spheres, challenged the long-held geocentric model and laid the foundation for modern astronomy. Though his ideas faced resistance during his lifetime, they inspired future scientists like Galileo, Kepler, and Newton. In addition to his astronomical achievements, Copernicus contributed to economics and governance, serving as a church administrator. Copernicus's work marked the beginning of the scientific revolution and has profoundly influenced our understanding of the cosmos. Then when we were in Krakow, we enjoyed a piano concert with music composed by the Polish music genius Frédéric Chopin. And he was a Polish composer and virtuoso pianist. He lived from 1810 to 1849. Chopin is widely regarded as one of the greatest composers for the piano. He was born in Warsaw, Poland, and he began performing and composing at a very young age. Many of these geniuses that we'll be learning more about we learned about today and we'll learn more about in our future teleconference were child prodigies, and they began composing amazing scores as young children, 6 years old. Chopin moved to Paris in 1831, where he became a prominent figure in the city's musical scene, composing primarily for solo piano. And sadly, he died at 39. His influence, though, on the development of piano music is profound, and his work remains central to the piano repertoire. Outside of Krakow, we toured an amazing salt mine that was worked for over 800 years. Just recently, it's no longer an active salt mine, but it was an active salt mine for 800 years. And it's about, the part we visited is 400 feet underground. And there are parts that go even 2 times more deep than that. You just walk for a very long time to get underground. And this is one of the earliest additions to the UNESCO World Cultural Heritage List. And this is a cathedral that is carved out of the salt. The miners were very devout, and several of them over a few generations, in addition to mining the salt on their own time, would come and created this beautiful cathedral. And even the The chandeliers that you see there are made out of salt. And the polished floor, it's just almost impossible to describe. And it was very dangerous to work in this area. Now that it's not an active mine, it's no longer dangerous, but there were, it just was an amazing visit to this underground world. Then our journey took a very somber turn as we visited the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial and Museum, the former German Nazi concentration and extermination camp in Poland. Auschwitz was the largest of the German Nazi concentration camps and extermination centers. Over 1.1 million men, women, and children lost their lives there. And I would describe the experience there as disturbing and haunting. From Krakow, we traveled to Czestochowa to see the Black Madonna in the Jasna Gora Monastery. And this is the largest Pauline monastery in the world. And it includes an icon showing a dark-skinned Mary holding the baby Jesus. And this has been worshipped for over 600 years and is credited with many miracles. 3 Roman Catholic popes have worshipped in this basilica, and Pope John Paul II, who grew up and lived in, not just grew up, but he was Polish, and he lived the majority of his life in Poland. His mother died when he was young, and his father took him and his brother to see this icon, and he told him, "This is your mother now." And Pope John Paul II remained dedicated to her throughout his life. And this is a very important Roman Catholic pilgrimage site. Then we traveled to Warsaw, the capital of Poland. And it's astonishing to consider how Warsaw has been rebuilt. When the Nazis invaded Poland, their goal was to wipe out Warsaw and build a new German city in its place. They did not do that in Krakow, but they purposely destroyed Warsaw and wanted to build a German city in its place. And the reconstruction is nothing short of miraculous. This image shows, the image at the top shows the buildings when they were all bombed out, and then how those buildings have been restored and look today. But a lot of it was just obliterated, just completely flattened like this. And this is the market square in Warsaw, which is beautiful and charming. And again, it's just astonishing to consider the reconstruction. It's astonishing to consider the destruction that took place and the miraculous reconstruction. On the right here is Marie Curie, who lived from 1867 to 1934. She was a pioneering physicist and chemist whose groundbreaking work on radioactivity made her one of the most influential scientists in history. She was born in Warsaw and moved to Paris to pursue higher education, where she conducted research with her husband, Pierre Curie. Together, they discovered the radioactive elements polonium and radium, revolutionizing science and medicine. Marie Curie was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, receiving the physics prize in 1903. She shared this with Pierre and with Henri Becquerel. And later, she became the only person to win Nobel Prizes in 2 scientific fields, earning the chemistry prize in 1911. She also founded the Curie Institutes in Paris and Warsaw, which remain major centers of medical research. Despite facing significant barriers as a woman in science, Curie's dedication and discoveries paved the way for advances in cancer treatment and nuclear physics, leaving an enduring legacy. So I hope you have enjoyed this journey through some of the art, science, and history of Central Europe.